Thank you so much, Shannon. I am thrilled to be here and be talking to you, my colleagues. I hope that you find the information that I present to you useful. And of course, we're encouraging you to have conversations in the chat and post your questions as we go along, and then I will be happy to answer those questions later. So let's get started. So the name of our webinar is Confident and Credible: How to Demonstrate Your Expertise and Professionalism to Students and Colleagues. And first things first, why is it? Why do we want to appear confident and credible? And why do we want to demonstrate our expertise? Well, first and foremost is because we want to help people, right? This is why most of us got into this profession. So that's a priority. We want to be helpful to more people. Then, so that we can get more students, right? So that we can spread our message and help more people, so that we retain our current students and so that they feel comfortable and supported by us, so that we could also get referrals from other healthcare practitioners. So this is what we will be talking about today. So the first question that I would like to ask you is, how much do you think you know? If you were to mentally assess your current state of knowledge as it relates to yoga on a scale from 1 to 10, what would it be? Just think about it for a moment. Now, I know that most yoga teachers and yoga therapists that I know, including myself, we love attending continuing education webinars like this one and other certification programs. So we are lifelong learners, which I think is wonderful. And we have that sense of curiosity about how yoga works and how human body works and all of that. But I think one downside to that sometimes can be when we attend all those speakers who know so much, the webinars by the speakers who know so much about their subject, we might get this impression that others know so much more than we do. However, in reality, you know probably just as much as others or more. It's just a different kind of knowledge. We have some sort of overlapping knowledge, right? But my knowledge is not the same as your knowledge. And there are different types of knowledge that we can be talking about. So there is theoretical knowledge of yogic practices and techniques, and that, of course, is very important to study from your training programs, from traditional texts, all those different sources, the programs that you went through, and I'm sure you continue to attend. So that's one category of knowledge. Then we have the practical application of that knowledge to specific students or groups of students. And that usually comes from experience. So you gain your theoretical knowledge and then you begin to apply that theoretical knowledge in your work with your students. And those two are intricately linked and they kind of feed each other, right? And you become more confident in your theoretical knowledge once you begin to apply it. I also find that it works the other way as well. For example, I started working with students one-on-one long before I did my yoga therapist training. So through my work with students one-on-one, I figured out a lot of things on my own. And then when I went through my therapist training, we had those wonderful, great presentations and speakers, but a lot of things that they were saying, I was saying, oh, I already know this. Oh, I already figured that out simply by working with people one-on-one and, reading up on their conditions and reflecting on what they were telling me, kind of filling up that bank of information in my brain. So these two work hand in hand. But at the same time, it's really nice to get that confirmation, right? When you figure something out on your own and then somebody else with more experience says the same thing, and you get that confirmation, wow, I am on the right track. So it's a really nice feeling. So I'm expecting that a lot of things that I tell you today, you already probably know, but I hope that you will get confirmation to the things that you've already figured out. And maybe you learn something else, some next layer of knowledge that you can use in your work. And then, of course, each one of us has lived experience, both personal and professional. It might be some sort of challenges that you went through, or a certain group you belong to. Maybe you're a caregiver, for example, so you understand what caregivers go through, or a parent or whatever, dealt with a health condition, so you know what other people who have the same condition, you have a personal, visceral understanding of what they're going through, and that's very important. It is essential. Or you might have additional professional experience. Maybe you're coming into yoga from after doing something else for a number of years, right? And whatever experience you gained there oftentimes can be translated in the work that you will be doing through your yoga classes and yoga sessions. And people are people everywhere. So as you gain experience, if you gain experience working with people elsewhere, you can definitely carry that over into your work in yoga. And then a different level connected to all of the types of knowledge above, but a slightly sort of different aspect of it is experience building student-teacher relationship or rapport, or in yoga therapy, we call it therapeutic relationship. So it's this level of interpersonal connection that we want to build from the very, very beginning, from our first touch point that we have with a potential student that hasn't even become a student yet, but could become a student, and then carry that through all of this process of building that teacher-student relationship. And this is what we will be focusing on today. So we will talk about different settings. We will talk about building that student-teacher relationship in classes, in private sessions, and in different referral scenarios. So the foundational thing is that we want to take our potential student on a journey from someone who potentially doesn't know anything about you or yoga therapy, to someone who trusts your judgment and embraces yoga for health and healing. Now, this doesn't happen overnight. It is a journey. So there are effective and ineffective ways to take your students on that journey and demonstrate your knowledge and expertise. I wanted to tell you a story, an almost comical scene that I observed once in one of the yoga studios that I used to work at. A class had let out, and all the students were filing out, and then the teacher came out, and then one of the students asked the teacher a question. I can't remember what the question was, but the student answered the question. They had a lively discussion. It was a really nice interaction. And then the student made like this, showed with a body language, the student was ready to leave, but the teacher was not done talking. Clearly, she was passionate about the subject, so the teacher kept talking, and she kept talking and talking and talking, to the point that it became comical, because the student's body language was showing that she really needed to go, but the teacher was still talking, to the point when the student made the sort of a movement toward the door, the teacher grabbed the student by the sleeve and held her back and kept talking at her. So this sort of grabbing student by the sleeve and pulling her back became this sort of image for me, is of how we don't want to share our knowledge. We don't want to shove it into our students against their will. So it can be we can be leaning a little bit too much into the tell aspect of it and bombarding students with information that we discovered for ourselves or we learned in, the latest workshop that we attended. All that is useful, but then we can become this sort of sage on the stage when we're just pontificating at our students, and very little of that sticks, and very little of that facilitates the building of the teacher-student relationship. So what we're a little bit more interested in is showing. So instead of telling so much, we want to show them with each action that we take, every interaction that they have with us, that we care. The expression that Sri Krishnamacharya used to use is the teacher should wear neutral clothing, and it doesn't mean the color, the actual color of their clothing, but the fact that the teachers should keep their knowledge and all that stuff that they learned to themselves, but only share it with their students as necessary, as they see fit, and in a way that would serve that student. And in fact, my teacher, Gary Kravtsov, was telling us about his experience in Madras, India, when he studied with Sri Krishnamacharya and later with T.K. Desikachar. And he said that students then almost had to beg for information from their teachers. That was a way of doing things. And the teacher would only impart information when they thought you were ready to receive the next teaching. Now, it's not, the same here. That's not how we do it now, but we need to find that balance between telling and showing stuff to our students. So how do your students gain confidence in what you know and who you are? It's if you show them that you take interest in what they're going through. So if you come across as empathetic and engaged, then of course, if the practices you choose for them help them feel better, and then if you appear confident and responsive as you offer those practices to them, and if your interactions, all the interactions you have with them, are reliable and frictionless. So if you appear organized and put together. So all these three main sort of things, they all come together like these pieces of the puzzle, and they form an overall impression that the student makes about you. So let's start with the first one. Well, let me just emphasize. So in every interaction they have with you, big or small, they will continue to form an impression of you and look for confirmation of these qualities. Do you come across as empathetic and engaged? Do you appear confident and responsive? And do you seem organized and put together? Now, how do you show that you take an interest in what they're going through? And I actually took that list from an interesting study that demonstrated that an empathetic and engaged provider who gave a dummy acupuncture treatment was just as effective as unengaged, non-empathetic provider who gave real acupuncture treatment. So the scientists concluded that being an empathetic provider was just as important as giving good service, like providing a useful service. And can you imagine if we combine the two? If we give them something that serves them really well and do it in an empathetic manner, then we're just, maximizing what our students receive from us. And they identified very specific strategies that you can employ, and probably none of them will be a surprise to you. The first one is the warm, friendly manner in communication. The second one was active listening to hear, not to speak. So that, for example, repeating patient's or, a student's words back to them, asking for clarification, saying things like, if I understand you correctly, you're saying yada, yada, yada. So things like that allow, give your students an idea that you're listening and everybody wants to be heard. Demonstrating empathy, such as saying, I can understand how difficult it must be for you, and meaning it, of course. Then thoughtful pauses in the conversation, which demonstrate that you're reflecting on what the student is telling you, right? So you don't just have a boilerplate response. And then communication of confidence and positive expectation. And this doesn't mean promising them don't overpromise, right? That's something that we don't want to do, but we can present it in a way that makes us co-creators of the experience, meaning that we can say that I've worked with students who experienced similar thing, and these types of strategies worked. So let's try those. If those don't work for you, because everybody is different, we can try something else, and we'll continue to investigate until we find something that you resonate with and that is effective. So with that, you're kind of taking them into that process and allowing them to co-create with you, which is very important. So why are all those things that we listed just now, why are they important? Building that relationship, having that empathetic understanding connection. Well, it's necessary because as humans, we have close reciprocal relationships with other humans. We seek those relationships and we rely on those relationships for physiological and resulting emotional regulation. This is a very important aspect to understand, and I'm sure you already know it, even if not consciously, on a subconscious level. Especially now in this age of division and at the age of technology that's kind of encroaching on every aspect of our lives, those interpersonal reciprocal relationships are more important than ever. And what we want to understand about that, as this is two nervous systems working together, communicating and trying to co-regulate each other. And that happens in every interaction we have with any other human being. But if the relationship that you have is, if you're talking to a stranger, like, a checkout clerk at the grocery store, you still expect some sort of co-regulation, but you don't care if it happens. If they're mean to you, okay, well, it's unpleasant, but it's no big deal. But when we're building a relationship with somebody new, or within our existing strong relationships, we expect subconsciously that we will co-regulate, try to subconsciously balance each other out. And when we don't get it, when reciprocity is not there, we feel deeply hurt and unsafe. So I really like this quote from Deb Dana from the polyvagal theory in therapy. She says that co-regulation creates a physiological platform of safety that supports a psychological story of security that then leads to social engagement. So it's the autonomic nervous systems of two individuals that find sanctuary in a co-created experience of connection. So it all boils down to that the sense of safety that our nervous systems are constantly seeking. And we are seeking it in different places, but particularly from other people. And I'm sure that most of you are familiar with Deb Dana's book, The Polyvagal Theory in Therapy. If not, I strongly recommend it. It's full of wonderful, very useful content for us as yoga teachers, and especially if you're a yoga therapist. So we're going to kind of touch on the polyvagal theory just a little bit, not to go too deep into it because that's a big conversation in and of itself. But the basic idea is that every moment of every day, we're climbing up and down this ladder of the autonomic nervous system. And it has to do with which parts of our vagus nerve are activated. So we can either be on top of the ladder and feel safe, which also means social and engaged, or we can start slipping because of what's happening around us or what's happening internally within us. And we can drop into the sympathetic activation where we start feeling overwhelmed and start feeling like we have hard time keeping up with things and start feeling anxious and irritated. And the world begins to appear dangerous. So we begin to kind of go down that ladder. And if we go far enough down that ladder, then we fall into the dorsal vagal activation where we feel like we're just buried under this huge load that we cannot get out of. We feel alone in this world. The world seems empty, dead, and dark. So this is the state. This is a very sort of dark state of shutdown that the autonomic nervous system had arrived to. And a couple of things to remember about this ladder is that we can't jump steps. So if we have come down far enough, it's going to take us time to climb back up because we have to climb that ladder step by step. So one thing, if there's one thing you remember from this presentation, is that a major part of our job as yoga teachers and yoga therapists is to help our students, or attempt to help our students, to climb up that ladder of the autonomic nervous system. Of course, it depends on where they are and how far down they are, and we are not miracle workers, but in every interaction we have, we're still trying to lift them up a little bit, help them in different ways to climb up. How do we do it? Well, of course, we have a variety of our yogic tools at our disposal, and when you look closely at the yoga poses and the breathing practices and the chanting and the mudras and the mantras and the guided relaxations and the meditations, all those things we have in our toolbox, underneath it all, the essence of them is regulation of the nervous system. So keep that in mind. And keep that in mind that regulation of the nervous system doesn't mean that you want to sedate it. It just means that you want to create a feeling of safety. And when you're feeling safe, it doesn't mean that you're just calm and even all the time. You can be excited, you can be laughing, you can be, there's a range of emotional state in that. But the underlying kind of foundation is that your nervous system feels safe. And that's why you're free to have all sorts of emotional expression. So this is what we're trying to create, kind of create a sense of safety with everything we do. Active listening and empathy, like we already said, is a big contributor to that. Toward rather than away signaling is a very important part of just interacting with anybody. When you have a toward signaling, it's as if you're leaning in to interaction, whether it's a conversation or something else. And you're showing it with your face, you're showing it with your body language, you're showing it with a tone of voice, you are leaning in. And away signaling is when you're leaning out of the interaction, you're crossing your hands or you're sounding defensive, or your facial expression communicates that you're stepping back from it. And of course, those things can be very subtle. And so whenever we're interacting with our students, we want to have sort of a toward signaling, overall signaling throughout our entire system. And like I said, it includes open and receptive body language and facial expressions, tone, volume, and timbre of your voice. We don't need to fake it. We need to keep it authentic, but at the same time, we can use the tone of our voice to try and regulate the nervous system of other people. One of the simplest, most obvious tools that we can use, if there's somebody's speaking really loud, we can start speaking really loud with them as well, and then little by little bring our volume and intensity of our voice down, and they will follow because of the mirror neurons we have in our brains, and we are automatically mimicking the people that we're interacting with in different ways. Then regulating our own breathing, and that goes to the area of keeping our own autonomic nervous systems in check. Because if you arrive in a room full of 50 people that are all bouncing off the walls because they're agitated or whatever, it's very important to have your own nervous system be grounded. It doesn't mean that they won't affect you. Of course they will, just by sheer number of people present and their energy. But in situations like that, we can utilize our own tools, like deep, steady breathing, and showing it to our students, right? So that they can mimic us back and start regulate their own breathing, even if we don't say it straight out. And this goes hand in hand with what I was saying. So we need to keep our own nervous systems balanced. And that means throughout the day, it means doing our own yoga practices. It means doing our own, breathing meditation and things like that, paying attention to our own autonomic states. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have a bad day. Anybody can and will have a bad day. But what I find happens is that if you generally have a very balanced and grounded nervous system and your students come to rely on it for their own co-regulation purposes, if you have a bad day and you arrive in class, in the agitated state or whatever, your students will step up and they will co-regulate you. It's that reciprocity that we're trying to cultivate, right? So they will support you as well and help you balance your own nervous system. It goes both ways. And I'm talking about your regular students now. And one really important thing to remember here is that our nervous systems are very attuned and they can spot a fake. So it's very difficult to fake something like a grounded nervous system for a long time because people will catch on. So just make sure that you're doing your own work on keeping your nervous system in a state of safety and balance. So building a student-teacher relationship happens throughout your whole time with your students. It begins way before your class or session. It continues during class or session, and it continues after your class or session. So let's talk about each one of those areas separately. Just remember that at every stage, what you're working on is regulating their nervous system. So imagine yourself as a new student, potential new student. So at the beginning of the new student journey, their nervous system is usually a bit flustered. Well, think about it for a moment. Let's say, this gentleman got some bad news from his doctor, and the doctor said, you need to move more, I need to stretch some. So gentle yoga would be a good solution for you. So now the problem has been identified, either by the person themselves or by somebody else. Anytime our nervous system encounters a problem, it gets a little agitated or more agitated depending on the size of the problem. So we're already there. If they don't know where to look for a solution, it becomes even more agitated, flustered, right? Because we have that sense of powerlessness. We don't know what to turn to, and there seem to be so many options, but I just don't know what to grab onto. So if they're unfamiliar with yoga or yoga therapy, or you as a teacher, anything new, it's another level of agitation for the nervous system because it's unfamiliar. Like, oh, I don't know how it's going to be. Even if they already know something about yoga, they've done yoga before, but they moved to a new place, or they're looking for a new yoga studio for whatever reason. Like, they know yoga, but they don't know this studio, or they don't know you. So that's another level. It can be mild or it can be severe, that level of unease that the person might experience. And on top of that, they also have to master up some energy to get started. This is called initiation energy, and that's strictly physics. For us to get going with anything, we need to sort of, hype ourselves up with something. We need to give ourselves a push to get going. And then once we get going, we usually can keep going a little bit more easily. But that initiation energy, it's a bit of an obstacle that we need to get over. So keep in mind, these are all the obstacles that your potential new student is confronted with before they begin looking for options to solve their problems. So what kind of impression you create on that potential student before you ever meet them? So we have the initial contact, we have session class scheduling, and intake liability forms. Those are usually like the first three things that take place. And here, the systems that you set up right off the bat will help you regulate your student's nervous system and save you a lot of trouble and build a lasting relationship. So let's say your students arrive at your website for the first time, and where they come from, is anybody's guess. Maybe they just found you randomly on the internet, or maybe they were just looking for yoga studios in their area and they found you on Google Maps. Maybe somebody recommended you, like your existing student. Maybe they're just walking in the neighborhood and they saw your space and they're like, okay, I'll give that a try. Or maybe they found you on social media. Maybe they really like what you're posting there. Doesn't matter where they come from. Usually they land on your website. And then what do they see on your website? The first impression. This is what some of the most important qualities that the homepage of your website needs to have. First of all, the imagery that looks accessible. If our gentleman from before arrives on your website and it looks like it's for young, skinny, bendy people, that's the imagery that you're leading with, he'll just say, okay, that's not for me, and we'll keep on going. Now, if that's your audience, skinny, bendy, young people, that's fine. Then that's your imagery should reflect that. But keep in mind, like who is your audience, who you're trying to appeal to, and make sure that the imagery on your website reflects that. Then another thing that we sometimes forget is that the messaging on the homepage should be very straightforward. In fact, it should be so easy that a caveman can grunt it. For example, if you teach chair yoga classes for older adults in, I don't know, Denver, Colorado, it should say so right then and there on your homepage. You might offer a bunch of different things, and it's fine to list them elsewhere. But when they imagine a caveman arriving at your webpage and being able to grunt, chair yoga, Denver, Colorado, right? What and where, it should be immediately clear to the person. And then if they're interested, if they feel like it applies to them, then they can explore a little bit further. Then your homepage should also tell them how to get started right away. They're here. They got here. They overcame all these other obstacles that we talked about before. So they're here and they are ready. They're as ready as they'll ever be because you know how distractible we are. We'll immediately start thinking about something else and go elsewhere. So we need to capture them the moment when they're ready. And it can be schedule now button or some sort of free offer. If you're doing one-on-one sessions, it can be free 20-minute consultation over Zoom. I don't know, whatever it is that you wanna offer them right then and there, it's best to, if you can, grab them or at least have an option for them to do something right then and there. And it's best if you can, if you can't get them to sign up right away, then at least getting their contact information, asking them to sign up for a newsletter and get a free book in exchange or something like that. Anything so that they leave their contact information with you, so then you can start talking to them directly, add them to your newsletter list, or even reach out in person if that's your jam, like whatever works best for you. But capturing their contact information is very important. And at the very least, you can ask them to follow you on social media. This is not a preferred way, simply because you're not in control here, meaning that it's social media sites, whatever they are, they're constantly changing their algorithms, and they decide who gets to see your message. And our feeds are so overwhelmed now with ads and nonsense and information from people that we don't know at all, that it's very easy for your message to get lost or you to lose contact with that person altogether if the algorithm changes. So it's not up to you here on social media. But if that's the only option you have, that's fine too. But generally, the best advice I ever gotten many, many years ago is keep your own lists. That's the best thing you can do for yourself, so you can reach your people directly and talk to them. And keep in mind, this is not just for you, it's for them too, because taking a concrete step toward something, toward solving their problem, will help them feel accomplished and less frazzled. So by scheduling that session with you, they'll be like, okay, I'm doing something about this, I'm taking a step, and now their nervous system is beginning to feel a little bit better. And session scheduling, that's the next sort of step. Easy initial scheduling helps you onboard your students quickly, right when they're actively seeking a solution, like we said, to the problem, and they're most motivated. So we want to capture them when they're ready. And the necessary qualities for the scheduling system is that it needs to be professional looking, meaning it needs to maybe have your logo, your information on it, and just look like looks professional, easy to use. It should have as few steps as possible for your students to go through. Excuse me. It needs to be mobile friendly, because everybody does everything on their phone nowadays. It needs to send them a reminder so that they don't forget and you don't end up with no shows. So let me just show you real quick how it works in our system, the mobile scheduling, and this is the student's view. This is where they would be taken to if you click on, just simple button on your website, link to calendar. It has all of your events. You can also have buttons that link to specific events, specific class or private sessions or something. But this link would lead to the full calendar. So the student would click on that. They could scroll and see what it is that you offer. Choose the class, click on the book button, choose on the date, choose on the time, that's the only one available for this class, enter their name, their email, if there's any additional information they want to add to you, and then click schedule. That's it. So it takes less than 30 seconds. So faster is better, easier is better, obvious is even better. Then forms. Generally speaking, we usually have two kinds of forms. It's either a liability form or an intake form. For all forms, If you have any other forms, they can be like pain assessment or Ayurvedic constitution or any other kind of forms. Again, the form needs to be professional looking, easy for your students to get, easy to fill out, easy to return, so they don't have to print something, fill it out, scan anything. Fewer steps, the better. And then not too long, which can be a little tricky as well. Remember, even when they're filling out the form, you're still talking directly to their autonomic nervous system, and you are telling them, this is okay, this is good, we're on the right track, you're supported, you're heard. So whatever questions you ask in the form, the length of your form, it all needs to work in the same direction, which can be a little bit tricky with things like a liability form because it can be jarring. It is necessary from the legal and insurance standpoint. However, it's usually not the best for regulating the nervous system because it brings up the worst scenarios. In any exercise can be potentially dangerous and life-threatening, and the language. Some people sign those forms all the time and it doesn't affect them at all. Other people will be affected and they will get scared and they will think that you're gonna, especially if they don't have any yoga experience, they will think that you're gonna make them stand on their head and they're gonna break their neck and whatever ideas people might get from it. So the question for you is, when will you give that liability form to your student? If you're confident that you know the student already, it might be just perfectly fine to email it to them right off the bat. But if you don't know them, it might be a good idea to give that form to them once they show up to class. When they're talking to a front desk person who can regulate them with their smile and their welcome attitude, and then give them the form so that they're already feeling like there's in the positive cocoon, and so they feel their nervous system will be less um, agitated by the liability form. And then intake form is a very interesting thing because, of course, it allows us to collect important information about your students, like whatever surgeries they have, whatever health problems they might be experiencing, all of that. It's very, very important for us to know. But another role it plays is that it establishes a framework for your work together. What is this work all about? Especially if people are arriving at a yoga therapy session or getting ready to arrive at a yoga therapy session. They have no idea what yoga therapy is. But by the kind of questions you ask, they will start from like, oh, I guess, my sleep matters. And she wants to know about my energy in the morning. I guess that matters. So in the intake form, we usually go through all 5 koshas and ask, some basic questions about to get an idea of where they are, their entire system. So first, it's comforting for students to know what to expect, just like what are some of the things that we will be taking into account. But also it might be novel for them that different layers of our systems impact one another. I mean, it's obvious for us, but it's not obvious for other people. So just by the type of questions you ask in the intake form, it will give them an idea of a little bit of what to expect. Now, during the class or session itself, meet and greet is very important. The whole overall impression that you create, what your space look like, what you look like, the toward attitude, how you greet your folks, how you talk to them. So you want to make them feel welcome and accepted exactly the way they are. Throughout the class or session, of course, you want to have an exchange of verbal and nonverbal cues that demonstrate that we care, showing it with every single action and with our tone of voice. And then afterward, at the end of the session, it helps to have some sort of verbal summary or some sort of homework that you give them, which will empower your students to do something on their own. It might be a formal sequence, or it might be just something that you ask them to pay attention to in their regular life, like a little assignment, when you're taking a shower, take a conscious shower. So every time you're showering, like really feel the water running down your skin, and just spend, a few moments, few minutes of your time breathing steadily and sensing that. So you can begin to, so they can begin to increase their, self-awareness, or their interoception, things like that. So then they will take their yoga home with them, so to speak, and will start integrating it into their lives. And then follow up. You can give them a homework assignment, like a practice, for example. You can also send them a form asking for their feedback after a private session, for example. How did you feel after the session? And what was your response the next day? You might send them some sort of a handout that kind of puts their condition or their situation into perspective, if they're the kind of person who enjoys handouts like that. So when you follow up with students, that's another opportunity for you to show them that you care, to show them that you're invested in their journey and what they're going through, and you will support them in that journey. Now, practice sequence, I'll just say briefly about it. Students might need more than once a week classes that they can attend with you to see meaningful results. So it's nice if they have something that they can do at home. They generally feel consistent home practice helps students build self-awareness, and of course, it helps them regulate their nervous system. And students also feel empowered, knowing that they have the tools on their own to positively affect their own well-being. And that's something that we're continuously working on, empowering their students so that they don't feel dependent on us or somebody else to help them feel better, but they know that they have their own toolbox that they can reach for if necessary. And like I said, encouraging home practice shows that you care about your student long-term growth. Now, it's nice to have some visual aids. I'm running short on time, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. This is just an example of my sequences, how they used to look when I used to hand draw them for my students, and how they look now using our sequence builder to design those practices. And it's really handy if you want to make it more, visually accessible, and also if you want to change something quickly from session to session, for example. We use stick figures because we think that they're more inclusive and they allow for instant customization. For example, when I work with students privately, I usually change the forms of poses all the time. And in our system, you can just open any pose, erase the parts that you don't want, redraw, where the arms or the legs go, where the head is turning and whatnot, and you'll have a completely new pose. And you can do that in the process when you're designing your practice. And we can also offer an easy way to switch between different pose variations, and it's very user-friendly. So just to summarize, how do you make your interactions with your students reliable, frictionless, and comforting for their nervous system? We set up systems ahead of time for each part of the process, things we do before, during, and after the class or session. We choose appropriate tools for scheduling, payment processing, forms, record keeping, newsletter marketing, so that you have those tools ready to go. You don't have to think about it every time, make those decisions every time. We always try to minimize the number of steps it takes them to complete the task, whether it's filling out the form or schedule a session, anything like that. And we want to make everything we send them or give them look professional. That means having your logo and contact information typed rather than written, so it's easier to understand. I mean, if you're an artist and you like your hand-drawn stick figures, that's wonderful. Many people don't, so it's easier to have some sort of imagery. It's easier or looks more professional if you give them a sheet of paper rather than a scrap of paper. So all those things form an overall impression of you being organized and put together. And now just briefly, how does that impact our referrals? Well, other healthcare practitioners, they are people too, right? So when we're interacting with them, we're also co-regulating with them and building that practitioner to practitioner relationship as well. So being mindful when we interact with them, what kind of impression we create, how grounded we are within our own nervous system. And then it's always better to give them a sample of your work. You can tell them 20 different times what is it that you do, but they probably won't be able to articulate it in depth. But if you give them an experience of working with you, attending your class or workshop or having a trial session or whatever, then they will have an actual experience of working with you, and they will be much more likely to recommend you, and much more, it will be easy for them, much easier for them to describe what is it that you do. Then it also helps when it's easy to schedule sessions with you, like you have a shared scheduling system, or you have those buttons right on your website where they can just go and literally schedule their clients for sessions with you. The easier it is, the better. And we didn't talk about it much, but following best practices in client observation, assessment, and goal setting, and that applies more when you are working with student one-on-one. So you keep proper records, you do your assessments and observations and record your findings. So go doing all the record keeping that other practitioners would expect from somebody like you. And then be able to demonstrate the work you are doing with them, with your students in written form. For example, if you are, if somebody had sent you, a massage therapist had sent you a client, it can be very useful to show the massage therapist the type of work you did, like a practice sequence of the practice that you are that you've given your clients, so that you have this constant sort of exchange and the communication process going, so they know what you are doing with the student and you know what they're doing with the student, and you're joining efforts to help your student feel better. And then, of course, keeping your records secure, making sure that your records are protected, password protected, or in our case, our records are HIPAA compliant and they're all stored within the security bubble. Even when your students filling out the forms that you create in our system, they're all stored within our security bubble. They never leave to travel to their email or back. They get a link and that sends them straight into our bubble where they fill out their information. So that's very important as well. And that's what I have. I mean, I have much more to say, but I think that that's enough information that I shared with you today. I hope that was useful, and I'm happy to answer any questions that might have come up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Olga. We can now move into the Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them. We did have a question come in, and that person asked if you had any recommendations as far as software for booking and the forms.
Well, our software. So we have a very comprehensive way to design different types of forms. We have our form templates that you can modify any way you like, or you can use our templates as is. And it's very easy. They're highly, highly customizable. And Another thing I like about our forms that they're non-threatening, meaning that when the link arrives at the mailbox of your student, they just click on link to fill out a form, and it just pops up question by question. And it's very easy to get through, so it looks attractive and it's easy to fill out. And currently we're in the beta scheduling, beta testing our scheduling system. So we've added quite a few features into it. And currently, right now is a really good time to get in because we're taking feedback from all of our members to add whatever features they want into the scheduling system. So if you have a feature that you really want, but you couldn't find it anywhere else, join in, become a beta tester, and let us know what it is that you would like to include. And we will definitely consider it and see how we can add it to the system.
Awesome. We just dropped the Sequence Wiz link in the chat, so
Thank
feel
you.
free to browse over to the website and check out all of their offerings. We did have a question. Is it available in other languages?
It is not available in other languages, meaning that you can enter any information into our system in any language you like, but the software itself is in English.
Some question from Julie. Teaching virtual group classes, please share tips on how to build empathy, engagement, etc.
A little trickier when we're talking about group sessions online. But I think all the stuff that I shared with you today as leading up to it helps, right? When they arrive at the session already feeling comfortable with you, scheduling was easy and you responded to their initial email quickly and you were kind in the way you responded. And then just how you show up, right? Your presence. The presence can be felt even, in a virtual setting, whether you present yourself as anchored, as having toward attitude, like leaning in, like we were discussing, the facial expression, how you're breathing. Our nervous systems are very, very attuned to all those things, even in the virtual settings. So I think that the principles are the same. It just maybe will take a little bit longer. But knowing from personal experience, I get students for private yoga sessions that find me online randomly and just schedule private sessions with me. And it usually, starts a little rocky. We don't know each other, but by the end of 15 minutes, because of how we were interacting and co-creating together, we already build a rapport. So it's a little different in a group environment, but I think it'll take longer, but it will still happen.
Awesome. And then question from Randy. What would be the top 3 things you would recommend if you're just starting to build your client base in terms of building confidence in your capabilities with your students?
Many things come to mind, but are you thinking about classes or private sessions? Those things are a little different, but generally speaking, having presence, like website presence, is so important that immediately gives an impression of to anybody who visits of who you are, what you stand for, what's important to you, and that comes across through imagery and the language that you use, that it's very approachable and inclusive. So that's the first thing. Your website is like your business card, so it needs to be create that impression. If you have social media presence, it's the same thing. Everything needs to be consistent. I guess that's something that I should emphasize, and it applies to everything. Consistency across the board with the way you show up in person, the way you talk to people, the way your website looks, your social media is, and minimizing confusion throughout. So it's easy for people to understand how to start working with you, how to do that particular pose, or how to follow up. So the less, every time they have to jump over an obstacle, nervous system gets agitated. So, and when you're starting out, my best recommendation is to tell people you know and show them what you do. Bring your friends and family to your classes, give them private sessions if that's what you're doing. Those are the people that love you, know you as a person. They now experience you in the new professional setting. They will be the one who will be messengers, who will spread the word about you. Because let's face it, all of us could use a little bit more nervous system regulation nowadays. And so the need is there. It's just getting the message out there to the people that you're available with those services. And when your messages are people who already know and care about you, it just carries more weight. So this is where I would start. Other things I used to do, just one quick thing that might work for you, I would take my workshops on the road, meaning I would have an agreement with a local YMCA to arrive and give them a free workshop for their members. I wouldn't charge anything for it, but then they would get an experience of working with me. And then I would get a few private clients from that, or I would use it as an introduction to a particular series that I was doing in my studio. So you can go places, give them an experience of what it's like working with you. And once they have that experience, then they can take the next step of kind of following you wherever it is that you are.
Awesome. Thank you, Olga. We have time for just one question, then we're going to wrap up. Of course, Olga's email, the website will all be included in the follow-up email. So any other questions, feel free to reach out to her directly. The last question is from Kelly. After the meet and greet / arrival of students to class, do you use an icebreaker to really make students immediately feel cozy and welcome? Or do you just dive into the intro / beginning of your class?
I actually wanted to share this story with you, but I kind of ran out of time. I popped into a gym yoga class once, and everybody was set up already on their yoga mats. And then a yoga teacher arrived, didn't look at anybody, walked straight to the front of the room, laid out her mat, set herself up looking at the mirrors with her back to the students, and spent the entire class talking to the mirror, and never left her mat. This is an extreme example of so many missed opportunities. When we are entering the class, we want to show, be welcoming and show people that we care. Body language, words, smiles, all of that. When we arrive we want to face the class. Generally speaking, we want to see what's going on, right? And again, we're building that reciprocal relationship. We can talk to some students, ask them questions. I think it depends entirely on your style and what feels authentic to you. Like we said, nervous systems spot a fake very easily. So if you're trying to be somebody else, your people will understand, like they will catch on to that. So what is natural to you? How do you usually talk in the normal setting? Do you talk about the weather? Talk about the weather, but don't get too distracted by things. But whatever feels authentic, I think, is what works best for people. And it can be different in different settings. If it's a small class and the students are all the ones that are already familiar with you, you can have all kinds of conversations. But if it's a new or larger class, or the setting is not, a little bit more formal or whatever, then it's a different kind of approach. But I think it's also useful to kind of get cues from your students. I know it's tricky when you are arriving at a class and there's 50 pairs of eyes just looking at you, and here you are in front of them. Taking a few deep breaths, smiling. Again, body language more than anything, facial expressions, leaning into it, is what the people respond to, I find.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Olga. Well, that wraps up today's session. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, and thank you to all of our attendees for being here with us today. We really appreciate all of you in our community, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Feel free to reach out with any questions you might have. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.